All right, this is a video lecture covering the lymphatic and immune system. We just finished talking about the cardiovascular system, and the lymphatic system works with the vessels to take up excess fluid and return it to the blood. So we're going to talk a little bit about lymph and how the lymphatic system works with the circulatory system, which is the heart and blood vessels. So looking at the components of the lymphatic system, we have this network of vessels, or ducts is the best way to describe these. These are lymph ducts that pick up excess fluid that has leaked out of the blood vessels and then returns them back to the general blood supply. So we see all these green ducts here that are kind of interlaced among our blood vessels. So this is a capillary, and as fluid leaks out of the capillary out into this interstitial space, which is between cells, the interstitial fluid, the pressure of that fluid on the outside of these lymphatic ducts causes tiny little valves to open in the lymphatic ducts, and the fluid flows into them. So when you have fluid in a tissue that's starting to build up, that puts pressure on the outside of the lymphatic duct and allows that fluid to be picked up by the lymphatic ducts and then is eventually returned back to the general circulation up here in the area of the chest, so at the top here. As the fluid enters into the lymphatic ducts, however, it flows through lymph nodes on its way back to being returned to the general blood supply up at the subclavian veins. So we'll talk a little bit about that process. So we have, looking at parts of the lymphatic system, again, we have the lymphatic ducts, which is all scattered throughout the body. Then we have the nodes, the lymph nodes, which are clusters of white blood cells to help filter out debris and bacteria that may have been picked up in the interstitial fluid through the lymphatic ducts. So we have a number of lymph nodes, a cluster of them here in the groin. We have a bunch in the axillary region in the armpit. We have them here up at the base of the neck and running up on either sides of the neck. And if you've ever cut yourself, maybe you've noticed that they get a little swollen and tender as some of the bacteria and debris is passing through there, through the lymphatic ducts, through that lymph node, and it's filtering out that bacteria and protecting you from infection. Sometimes it can be a sign of infection as well. If we have too much bacteria in the body that the lymph nodes can't handle and the immune system can't eliminate, then we need to go on antibiotics. But we also have tonsils. These two are little patches of lymphatic immune cells that help prevent infection in the mucous membranes of the respiratory tract. So the tonsils are located in the back of the throat, and then we have the adenoids that are up at the base of the nasal cavity, a little higher up. The red and white bone marrow, the red and yellow bone marrow, we find in bones, but red bone marrow specifically is found in the ends of our long bones in adults, and that is where our red and white blood cells are produced. And the thymus is a gland that lies on top of the heart, and this is where T cells mature. Once they are produced in the red bone marrow, they travel through the bloodstream to the thymus, and this is where they mature and start to recognize foreign cells and foreign particles from self particles. So they mature there and learn to recognize foreign from self, so the body doesn't attack its own cells. And then we have the thoracic duct, which is a large lymphatic duct that empties into the left subclavian vein. That's where the lymphatic fluid, the lymph, meets the bloodstream and is returned back to the blood. So that's a really important vessel here, the thoracic duct. So we'll talk about each of these parts in a little more detail as we go through. Like I said, lymphatic vessels are a lot like our regular blood vessels, a lot like veins actually, because they have these valves. So the valves open up when there's pressure on the lymphatic vessels from the outside. It pushes that valve inward and lets the lymph flow into the lymphatic duct, but then it can't flow out. So the way to get that lymph flowing then from, say, the lower part of the body upward toward where it's going to return to the blood supply at the subclavian vein here, it requires skeletal muscle contraction to move that lymph from the lower legs up into the bloodstream again. So that's why it's so important that our patients get up and walk around, or that we ourselves get good, basic activity during the day, because it helps our lymph move throughout our body, and to move our lymph through our lymph nodes, of keeping our lymph clear of bacteria and debris. So it's the skeletal muscles around the lymph ducts that helps to contract and move. So when they contract, it moves that lymph upward throughout the body. So we know that exercise is really good for immunity and keeping us healthy because it just keeps our lymph flowing. So then we have different types of lymphatic organs. We have the primary lymphatic organs that actually are involved with the production of blood cells and also the maturation of blood cells. So blood cells are produced and mature in the red bone marrow. That's where they're produced. And then some of those cells, for example, B cells, B lymphocytes, they mature right there in the bone marrow, where T lymphocytes mature in the thymus. So they are primary lymphatic organs. And then the secondary lymphatic organs are just those swellings of lymph nodes throughout the circuitry of our lymphatic system, where lymph flows through them and captures debris and bacteria. The tonsils and the spleen. The spleen is also another important lymphatic organ. It helps us fight or protects our immunity, and it's a good storehouse of red blood cells. So we know that the spleen is active with viral, protecting us against viral illnesses. And if someone has an enlarged spleen, that can put them at risk of bleeding because it's such a highly vascular organ, has a really good blood supply. So it is an organ that we definitely want to protect. And people who get in car accidents sometimes can lose their spleen because of the impact of the car accident causes the spleen to burst. We can live without our spleen, but it makes us a little more prone to viral illnesses if we don't have that for protection. So looking at the primary lymphatic organs, the red bone marrow is where red and white blood cells are produced. So in children, all their bones have red bone marrow throughout. And as we age and become adults, we only find red bone marrow in the ends of our bones. In the middle of the bones, the medullary cavity is full of yellow marrow, which is a fatty material. So it does not produce blood cells there. Only in the ends of our bones where the red bone marrow is found. And we also said there's a special type of white blood cell, B lymphocytes. They mature in the red bone marrow before they enter the general bloodstream and are active in immunity. The thymus is that organ that lies on top of the heart. It is very large during childhood, and then it atrophies and turns to fat as we age. So in adults, the thymus is just a little fatty structure. It's not very prominent anymore. But during childhood, it produces a hormone that matures T cells and allows T cells, T lymphocytes, which is a type of white blood cell that helps trigger our immune production. So these T cells mature in the thymus. That's where they start to recognize self from non-self. So T cells are activated against non-self or foreign cells and proteins and whatever foreign materials come into the body. The job of T cells is to activate the immune response. So it's very important they are able to recognize self from non-self. And then the spleen, like I said, is a very vascular organ, lots of blood vessels. It filters our blood and gets out that excess debris that might be picked up in the tissues, infected tissues. So they have macrophages, which is a type of white blood cell that actively destroys and engulfs bacteria and debris that is in the bloodstream. So the spleen has a very important role for that, and it helps to kind of process red blood cells that have outlived their lifespan and are breaking down. The spleen removes them from the blood and keeps that cellular debris from remaining in the bloodstream. So because it has such a thin outer covering and is so vascular, like I said, it can rupture in a high impact accident. Lymph nodes, we said, are found throughout the body. They are found along the lymphatic vessels. So as lymph flows through the vessels going back toward that subclavian vein, they filter debris out from the lymph. So there we also find macrophages. We also find B cells, T cells to help with immunity, fighting infection, recognizing cancer-infected cells. So they're all very important for our immune system function. So We find them in the neck, at the base of the neck, running up the side of the neck, underneath the jaw, in the armpit, and the groin. And those are common places a doctor is going to feel if someone kind of presents with an infection. They're going to feel in those areas to see if there's maybe something, going on, that the lymph nodes would be swollen. So in people with leukemia, where we have cancer of the white blood cells, or people with just generalized infections, we're often going to feel swollen lymph nodes in these regions. So the tonsils are a special secondary lymphatic organ. They function just like lymph nodes. They fight infections that come in through the nose and the mouth. We have tonsils underneath our tongue. We have them in the back of our throat. If you've ever had strep throat and you look in the back of your throat, those are tonsils that have become swollen with pus-filled patches on the surface. And then the adenoids are a little higher up in the back of the nasal cavity. So 3 different regions for tonsils that protect us from infection in the nose and mouth. And sometimes they become so swollen and chronically filled with bacteria that people need to get them removed. They're no longer doing their job in preventing infection. Sometimes they're a source of infection if the bacteria can't be cleared by the immune cells that are present in those tonsils. Also, people that are chronic snorers, that they have enlarged tonsils, it kind of blocks the airway, and when they're sleeping at night, it causes excess vibration as those tonsils vibrate on the back of the throat. So people will get their adenoids removed, or the palatine tonsils, the ones in the back of the throat, they'll get those removed as well, and sometimes that'll help with sleep apnea and snoring. And then we have Pyres Pageant. This is a special type of lymphatic tissue that is found in the digestive, deeper in the walls of the digestive tract and the appendix, and that just again prevents infection that might come in through the food that we eat. So if there's any kind of break in that intestinal wall, these Pyres patches are found in a little deeper layer, which will help fight infection that might have crossed through that barrier of the intestinal tract. So we'll pick up in the next video talking about the immune system and the different branches of the immune system.